As the title suggests, I somehow found a method to access different universes. This story is not one of scientific discovery, or one filled with adventure and exploration of all the possible roads mankind could have taken across history, but a warning for those who will attempt this after I have finished my tale. Why am I telling you this then? I figured at some point in the future, someone will stumble upon this method, the same way I did, and try for themselves to see what could have been, or even worse, tell others about it. I want to prevent the unnecessary suffering caused by the knowledge of what happens beyond our universe. I will explain when and how it happened. As for why, I still can't fully understand, but I have a theory I will get to later. It happened during a summer night. I was awake, facing the unbearable heat while my family was asleep. Sleepless nights where I am forced to reflect upon my thoughts were a common occurrence as of late. The most common thought, one that has probably plagued many people before me, and will plague even more after I pass on, is what might have been if something else happened. Of course, this is just a generalization. This is the core of countless questions, some milder than others. Some might ask, what might have happened if I didn't slack off during college? Wouldn't I have been in a better position in life, instead of being stuck in the endless repetition that I call my job? Others may think, what might have happened if I asked that cute girl or guy at the bar out? Would I now be happily married with kids and not have to deal with this crippling sense of loneliness? On a grander scale, historians might ask what would have happened if one leader or another followed a different path, resulting thus in their grand victory or humiliating defeat. As for me, I was simply trying to remember what choices I made that led me to this point in my life. It wasn't a bad point, but it wasn't that exciting either. With this in mind, I finally fell asleep. Dreams have always fascinated me, with both the incredible worlds that the mind can create to the horrific nightmares that can make you feel a sense of dread for the rest of the following day. Lucid dreams in particular are some of the most amazing things a person can experience. Being able to shape the world around you is simply fantastical. When I ended up in the REM phase of my sleep, and finally entered the dream itself, I could tell right away that I was lucid. But there was something odd about it. Even though I was fully aware, there was nothing around me. Everywhere I looked, it was an empty, white void that seemed to stretch endlessly. After the initial shock, I tried creating something, anything, but it was pointless. After wondering what I should do in this empty canvas that I found myself in, I saw something in the distance. A small black dot that appeared out of nowhere. With nothing better to do, I went towards it. As I was getting closer, that one small dot was separating into thousands, and then hundreds of thousands, and finally millions of small dots. When I finally reached them, I realized they weren't just small dots. As far and wide as the eye can see, in the vast nothingness that I was floating in, rows of screens were showing me all kinds of images. From a warm campfire, calling you near it with the promise of warmth and comfort, surrounded by people I didn't recognize, yet feeling like I could trust them, in a forest so dense that you couldn't see outside of the welcoming light of the fire. To the hellscape that is a war battlefield, with mountains of deceased people, pools of crimson blood that would make even the toughest people I know squirm with fear, surrounded by what seemed to be enemy forces. In the end, I chose to look at something relatively normal. A person just walking in a city. The city itself was mildly interesting, with some old buildings, some of which you could see through the holes in the walls, showing the architectural history of the town I was into, contrasting with the modern buildings that would make even Asimov proud. Unconsciously, I was reaching for the screen with my hand as I was admiring the images. Suddenly, the person stopped moving. There was no rhyme or reason to it. They just stood there, so still. He looked like he was posing for a painting. As I tried to move to a different screen, the person moved in the same way. That was the moment I realized that I had become the person in the screen. The person was a guy, dressed in a black suit, strolling in the late evening, most likely trying to relax after a workday. That was when someone called from behind me. Turning around, I saw a lady walking towards me. She was one of the most beautiful people I saw in my entire life. Her bright red lips, her luscious red hair, her piercing emerald eyes, her face that seemed to be sculpted by a master in his craft, and the red velvet dress she was wearing could make even Aphrodite jealous. Okay, I get it. You didn't like how the waiter talked to you, and you're right. But please wait for me after storming out. I was confused. I tried telling her, sorry, you must have gotten the wrong person. But what actually came out of my mouth was, you're right. I'm sorry, darling. I know how I can get sometimes. I was taken aback by the fact that I couldn't control what I wanted to say. Not only that, but I could barely control my movements. And even then, in very small increments, forcing me to go along with this person's will. As I was walking with the lady in hand, in search of a new restaurant, I was thinking that since I couldn't control the body I was in, and it looked completely different from mine, I must be dreaming that I'm another person entirely. I woke up after reaching the new restaurant. It was the next day. After remembering what I dreamed last night, I was surprised to be sure. But I rationalized it by saying that I had stranger dreams in the past. While getting ready to face the day, I noticed that I was crankier than usual. Lack of sleep does that to me, so I wasn't concerned. The rest of the day was relatively normal, until a certain point. I greeted my family, I ate my breakfast, and got ready for work. The traffic was normal for this hour, and the weather was a bit better than the scorching heat from yesterday. However, the day got odd when I reached the building I was working in. As I was entering the building, there was someone behind me. Since I didn't sleep that well last night, I was walking slower, resulting in them bumping into me, spilling some coffee on my work clothes. The person started apologizing frantically, but I tried to assure her that it was all right. She looked familiar. But at the time, I couldn't say why, since I've never seen her before. While reaching my desk, thinking on how to deal with today's tasks, I met with John, a good friend from the company. We talked a bit before our supervisor came in and told us we had a new colleague. That's when it hit me. That lady, the same that I bumped into at the entrance of the building, and as of now, our new accountant in our division, was the same lady I dreamed of the previous night. Initially, I couldn't believe it, but the resemblance was uncanny. The way she walked with a grace, resembling the grace of someone that was born into aristocracy. The kindness in her voice that could soothe anyone. The simple fact that she seemed a genuinely good person. And most importantly, those eyes that you could look forever into were all identical to the lady in the red dress. I didn't approach her in fear I might have accidentally mentioned the dream I had of her. Everyone in the office got along with her as if she'd already been a part of our team. Even John, one of the shyest persons I know, said that when he was around her, he would feel more energetic and that all his worries were disappearing. At the end of the day, when I finally reached my bed, I tried piecing everything, thinking how it was possible to dream of someone I was unaware existed. But in the end, I thought it was a simple coincidence, and I fell asleep. I was in the same white void, but this time I was already at the multitude of screens. In front of me was the screen I looked at last night. I moved a few rows down and chose another screen, this time fully prepared to enter. It was a party at a villa. The loud music blaring through my ears could be heard from kilometers away. The alcohol was running in rivers. The people were dancing and the night was full of that specific atmosphere you can only get during the craziest parties. It seemed I was the owner of the house and the host of the party. Mostly because everywhere I went, people were saying how much fun they were having and how I should host parties more often. In the end, the thing that caught my eye was a certain someone. As you might have guessed, it was the new colleague, dancing away, this time dressed in a more casual way. I was distracted by her, and I didn't notice when I bumped into one of the dancers, a mountain of a man. Unfortunately, he was reeking of vodka. He started picking a fight with me and hit me squarely in the nose. The pain felt incredibly real, almost as if I was hit by a professional boxer. When I came back, my pillow had a red stain on it. I rushed to the bathroom and my nose was bleeding. At the time, I was less worried about a mere nosebleed and more worried about arriving late, and so I brushed it off. I went to work, completed some tasks, and talked with John, usual. However, the lady came to our desk and started chatting me up. "Hi, I hope I'm not interrupting something important. I just want to say I'm still sorry for what happened 2 days ago." "It's alright. Happens to everyone at some point." "I was just about to take my lunch break anyway. Want to come with me?" "Sorry, but I still have some things to finish. I'll come in a few." After John left, I saw a distinctive glint in our colleague's eye. "Thank you for not getting mad. Usually I'm not that clumsy. What's your name?" "I'm Mark." "Nice to meet you, Mark. I'm Haley. Haley and I talked for a bit, and we seemed to hit it off. To my surprise, John joined our chat once he came back, and he seemed more talkative than usual. After work hours, Haley and I ended up alone. She asked me on a date, and obviously, I agreed. Nothing unusual happened after that. During daytime, I spent time with both Haley and John in the office, and with Haley be it at the cinema or the local park, eventually becoming a couple and moving in together. During nighttime, I went into the void, exploring vast scenarios. Be it a member of the mafia, or an astronaut, or a doctor, or whatever I felt like doing in the moment. I explored all the pleasures life can give you without a care in the world. Looking back, the pleasures were just a veil over my eyes, keeping me blissfully unaware of what was actually beyond my escapades. There were a few similarities across the different scenarios I explored. The first was that no matter what scenario I ended up living, I wasn't able to fully control the body I inhabited. As a result, I was a hitchhiker of another person's life. The second was that in some capacity or another, Haley was always present, be it a picture of her, a person interacting with the other people in the dream, or even just her voice on the radio. The third was that I couldn't see myself in the mirror, the reflection always being fuzzy. And the final thing was that no matter how much I tried leaving the void, or one of the screens, until I woke up, I was stuck there. These things didn't bother me much in the beginning, since I felt good regardless. It didn't last long, however. I started getting tricked by the screens, thinking I was in for a good time, but ending up either mentally or physically hurt. Be it walking down a peaceful alley and getting shot by a robber, drinking at the bar and hit with a bottle square in the head, or even being physically assaulted with bats at my own wedding. Every time I woke up from these horrific incidents, there was either a scar where I was cut or a bruise where I was hit. I dreaded going to sleep now, since there was no escape. I couldn't just stay in the void either, because sooner or later one of the screens would suck me in. The worst was the last screen I went into. This time I was a presidential candidate during my first run. I was doing well in the polls and the people seemed to like me. I was walking to my house when I suddenly saw nothing but black. I got pushed into a car and I didn't know where I was going. We seemed like we drove for hours until finally we stopped. I got out of the car, went to the building, and got tied to a chair. They took the bag off my face and I finally understood what was going on. In this particular dream, there was a small faction strongly opposed to my ideas. They called themselves the League of True Freedom, and were considered controversial, to say the least. They were known for underhanded tactics such as blackmail and instigating violence against those who weren't fully committed to their cause. Their leader told me to either drop out of the race or support the consequences. I wanted to lie to them, saying I was dropping and alerting the police of what they're capable of doing. But what came out of my mouth was, "I'll never drop because of some threats from a small, insignificant band of criminals." That's when they started. They brought knives, metal bars, surgical tools, and some other instruments I couldn't see clearly. And they began torturing me until I dropped out. I kept trying to wake up, but I couldn't. no matter how severe the pain was. I don't want to describe what I've been through, because if I start thinking about the agonizing moments spent in that world, I would feel the horror again. At one point, however, they wanted to humiliate me. So they brought in a mirror so I could see the deplorable state I was in. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time I saw my reflection. What I saw was none other than myself in the suit I wore the day I was kidnapped, beaten to a pulp. Then, that's when Haley showed up. I kept looking at her, not knowing how she got here. But they couldn't see her. She came close to me, touched my forehead, and my consciousness was lifted. I was back in the vastness of the white void I kept finding myself in every night. All the screens were gone, and in front of me was none other than Haley, dressed in all white. I must admit, finding you this time was a bit harder than usual. What happened? How are you here, Haley? You simply were unfortunate enough to choose a life that was about to end. If I didn't intervene, you wouldn't have come back from there. About to end? These were dreams. If I died, I would have just woke up. You didn't figure it out, huh? They weren't just dreams. To you, they might have been. But in reality, they were all your lives. Didn't you think how even once, whenever you suffered in your dream, your suffering came with you? How's that possible? I only have one life. Every day since you were born, you made a choice. And that choice was reflected in the creation of new lives. Whenever you visited other lives, your body from your world was connecting to the body from the life you've chosen to observe, thus being able to feel what you went through. If that's the case, where am I then? This is my realm, while you see only a small section filled with screens, those of which reflect your choices. I see every possible choice made by every single human that lived or will live. That's why it took a while to find this particular consciousness this time. Who are you? I have many names, depending on which religion you happen to find yourself into. For now, Hypnos will suffice. Isn't Hypnos the goddess of sleep? Indeed. I do not know how or why you're here, but I had let you stay because it was interesting seeing someone jump around experiencing their other lives. Why did you come to the real world then, if you could see me throughout all my other lives? It was merely a pure curiosity. I can leave this realm and interact with every single life possible. But for the first time, someone from your kind came into my world. I wanted to determine what was different about you. No one across the multiverse, not even your other versions, managed to access my domain. But I have seen enough. The last life should be a warning to you. Infinite choices, infinite possibilities, some more painful than others. From now on, you'll never be able to access this realm again. And if I ever see another human in the void, I won't be as forgiving. Goodbye, Mark. That's when I finally woke up. The wounds suffered from the torture were still there. However, they were closed already, leaving only the ugly scars of a broken man. Thankfully, my family wasn't home, so they didn't notice me washing the blood that soaked my bed. I arrived late at work, but I managed to clean most of it. When John looked at me, I saw his face turn pale. He could see that I had been through something horrible, but I never told him what happened. He asked me about Haley, since she didn't come for work that day. I said I didn't know. Obviously, Hypnos didn't have a reason to step in my world anymore, and so everyone thought she just left. As for my dreams, I was finally able to return to my normal, actual dreams, as she said. When I went to the hospital, the doctors were shocked I wasn't dead, since my body seemed to suffer far more damage than what was thought humanly possible. As for how I ended up in her realm to begin with, I have a theory. Carl Jung proposed the idea of the collective unconscious, saying that individuals of the same species share the same unconscious mind, filled with universal symbols and motifs. What I propose is that the collective unconscious isn't shared just between the individuals of the same species, but with the same individual across multiple worlds. Tapping into it would allow someone to enter their minds from another timeline of events. I don't know how I tapped into this in the first place, but if you ever manage to wander into a white void filled with screens, you should try your hardest to wake up before you end up in one of those screens, or even worse. Meet the god of a realm that shouldn't be accessible for humans. If we are capable to inflict such horrors onto ourselves, I do not wish to know what a god with all the time and lives in the multiverse can do.
Greetings, friends and fiends. It is I, Chronicler. We here at Creepy Spaghet would like to thank Mad Scientist 2 for allowing us to tell their story. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to stay updated on these terrible tales. And make sure to check out the author in the links below. If you're interested in having your story narrated, be sure to reach out to our humble overseer, as he continues his journey to pull the darkest stories from the infinite depths of the internet. Until next time, fiends. And remember, we are darkness.